Hello, Empowered Woman. Welcome to this episode of the Empowered Woman podcast. Today I had the pleasure of talking to NATZKE, an 8th degree black belt master instructor and former national taekwondo champion, who is now a life leadership coach, keynote speaker, and Amazon #1 best-selling author, transforming lives through his unique brand of black belt leadership. We talked about his story and using the principles of martial arts to unleash your inner champion in every area of your life. So good. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Empowered Woman podcast, the #1 show on personal growth, visibility, and profit for women entrepreneurs. If you're wanting to start believing in yourself, giving yourself permission to succeed, and let your voice be heard to make an impact in the world as an entrepreneur, this is the place for you. I am so glad that you're here. My name is Marta Spurk, and I'm your host, triplet mom, woman empowerment coach, and all things motivation extraordinaire. Welcome again, and let's dive into today's episode. Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely, Marta. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we connected through Gary Barnes. I had participated in my first boot camp that I participated with him was virtually last year, and I heard about you, but I wasn't live, so I wasn't able to participate in the board breaking, which I still wasn't able to participate in the event in January. But I am determined to make it happen in July. I think is the next one, right? So I just loved the connection call that we had and learning more about how you got started with what you do. Just fascinating how you've taken your knowledge from martial arts to help individuals with the confidence, self-confidence, and just self-empowerment, which is what I'm all about. So I am super looking forward to hearing more details and to have my audience and to share your story with my audience as well. So why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Great. Well, my name is NATZKE. My business is called Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching. I'm an 8th degree black belt and former national taekwondo champion. And so ran a martial arts school for several years and still run a martial arts organization. But now I mainly work as a life leadership coach, keynote speaker, seminar facilitator, as well as an author.
Amazing. And I'm sure there are many people listening who would love to hear about the transition, because many people in the coaching business or in the coaching industry just long for the day where they can call themselves a keynote or, and really transition into the speaking part of things. And I would love to hear on that. But let's backtrack a little bit into when you got into martial arts, which modalities you've been involved in, and all that stuff, and then we'll move into the coaching.
Sounds good. Well, I started my martial art training back in 1973. Wow. I was a short little chubby kid who was enamored with a TV show at the time called Kung Fu. Mm-hmm. And for those of your more seasoned listeners, you may remember that it was about a Shaolin monk who is walking across the American desert, and the bad guys try to beat him up. And he takes care of him using his Kung Fu. And when you're 10 years old, it's the coolest thing you've ever seen.
Yes.
And it was interesting back then because back in the day, martial arts was not, as we think of it today, as a activity for kids. Mm-hmm. I was 10 years old, but I was in with a bunch of 20-year-old men. And so very different environment. It wasn't until the kid movies came out that it became very vogue for kids to come. So I grew up fast. I was training with the men and doing my thing. And there was one other woman in the class too. So anyway, that's how I got my start. And it was one of those things where I knew as soon as I went there, I felt like I came home. I saw people doing these movements and whatever, and I was just like mesmerized by it. Mm-hmm. And I haven't stopped since.
That's amazing. So you started with Kung Fu then?
Actually,
that was the modality.
Taekwondo. It's interesting. The TV show was called Kung Fu.
Okay.
And then there was this thing at my community center. I grew up in a very small town in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. It was called Korean karate. And so I just went whatever I could, and it ended up being a great martial art for me, Taekwondo, because it's a kicking martial art, and that's very much akin to my skill set. So
Oh, that is so exciting. And then moving into becoming an instructor and taking this into a professional level, was that like right away as you grew up?
It's interesting that you bring that up because I literally have it over my shoulder here. I have an autobiography I wrote when I was 11 years old.
Oh my goodness.
So imagine you're in 5th grade and, when I was 1 year old, I did this. When I was 2, I did this. And in that entry, it says, when I was 10 years old, I started Taekwondo. I'm
Mm.
now a blue belt. And one day I want to own my own martial arts school.
Wow.
So it was just there. It was always something I wanted to do. And I didn't go there directly.
Mm.
Out of college, I worked in corporate America for 10
Okay.
years, sales, got great experience there. But then once I was transferred to Denver, it seemed like it was time to follow my dream.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love listening to these stories because um, recently I always tell myself, and I talk to my clients and I share this, just be patient with yourself. Things, don't happen overnight. But in a way, I feel like we're all impatient. So we might as well just embrace that we're always looking into the future and understanding that that's our vision, that's our vision that we're casting, right? So it's a matter of persistence. So kind of like the impatience, there's a persistence in there that you're, even if it's not going to happen right away, like you just said, out of college, because when we see people that are successful, we think they were born like that and they just, started it right away. Like you started, fighting and learning, and then you just opened your studio right away. And that's not how it happened. But I'm sure all of the skills that you learned in those 10 years were helpful to owning your own business then.
Without question, without question. And it was one of those things too, where there was a lot of anxiety and fear of making that career move.
Yeah.
Because I had tremendous success in the corporate world and was really being fast tracked for more responsibility, but it wasn't where my heart was. And it was so in that first year leading up to it, and then the first year in business, I was constantly in this, these states of panic and excitement at the same time. And it's interesting how, many times I was ready to walk away from it even before it started. And luckily I didn't, because it was life-changing for me.
Yes, amazing. Well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about several different questions where I want to go with this, because I do want you to talk about how martial arts can be helpful into you self-control and into owning a business and get into the aspect of things. But I remember the conversation that we had, and I mentioned having two young boys. So I have triplets, and I would love for the girl to be involved as well too. But I know just from their behavior that it would be great for them to get involved. And you mentioned to me how important it is. And even with them being 5, that's a great age to get started. So I know there's lots of moms and some dads too that listen to my show. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about how that is important. What are some of the things that they can learn? What is the ideal age? And then we'll move into the business and all the other stuff.
Awesome. Well, I'm obviously a little bit biased. I really think that any child would benefit greatly from martial art training. And when I own my school now, my students own those schools, and they have programs where they have preschool martial arts. So it's 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And literally, when I had my studio, I had students that started with me at that age that stayed with me all the way through high school.
Amazing.
In fact, I'm thinking of a couple, 2 brothers that did that, and they ended up going to West Point. On scholarships. And another girl, I wrote her letter of recommendation to Yale University.
Wow.
But they started with me as like 4-year-olds. And it was just something that, the skill set that they learn, the focus, the concentration, the respect, the confidence to be able to move through obstacles. I think there's almost, it's like second to none. And one of the things I love about martial arts is I call it the great equalizer. So if you have a child that is very shy and withdrawn, it helps take them out of their shell.
Right.
You have like I think you and I talked about, your boys are quite energetic, right? And
Yes.
maybe there's a lot of energy that needs to be calmed down. It helps them focus and channel that. So like I said, I call it the great equalizer.
Yeah. Oh, and that's so amazing. And I can already see how that is beneficial for adults too. And even all the things that you have learned throughout the years and through owning your business, and now taking all of that into coaching people. And even though, because tell us a little bit more then, as a keynote, obviously you're not teaching them martial arts, you're teaching some of the principles. How does that transfer into the confidence and the empowerment that you bring when you're speaking?
Thank you. So thanks for asking. I mean, it really is my metaphor. And it's interesting, very early in my career of teaching martial arts, and I was successful as a tournament competitor and all that kind of stuff, but I never loved to just fight. But what I loved was the principles that it helped not only impact my life, but in those of my students. So I basically I have what I call the 7 qualities of black belt leadership. And it's really, it's about taking those things that I train any martial arts student and just applying it in everyday life. And one of those is having what I call a purposeful vision, right? So being driven by that vision, and that's our North Star. Another one would be what I call conscious persistence. So, when you're in martial arts, you have to be present right there. And many of us are persistent about things, but we're not really thinking about what we're persistent about. It's like, I always joke, have you ever been in a meeting, you drive 40 minutes home, and as you're coming up the driveway, you have no idea how you got home because your mind was someplace else, right? And then the final one I love is I call it inspired action. So it's like we can have all these thoughts and all these, things that we adhere to, but you have to take the action. And martial arts by nature is an action philosophy. And so we integrate both the philosophical aspect into the way of grounding that in our bodies. And I think we can do that as business people.
Right. Definitely. And I want to get into that in a minute, but now I'm curious because you talked about kids that are more withdrawn, and then martial arts helps with that. And then the other way around as well. Which kind were you? Because you're just so calm, and I just love listening to you talk. And I know why you're an amazing speaker and an amazing instructor too, because you exude such peace, but also a lot of confidence. So I'm curious.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I was quite the overweight kid.
Okay.
Before I started martial arts. In fact, some kids called me Chris Fatsky. So I was very self-conscious about my body. I think I was relatively outgoing and gregarious just by nature, but man, kids can be tough on one another. And so it was martial arts that really kind of helped me move into the comfort of my body. And all of a sudden the confidence grew. And then very early in my career, my instructor saw a talent in me, not only as a physical martial artist, but as a teacher. So from the time I was 13 years old, I was in front of a room teaching classes.
Wow.
And there is no better, I think, training grounds of being able to publicly speak and also lead and direct than in teaching. And it was one of the best gifts he ever gave me.
Yes. Oh, that is so true. I love that so much. It is because, as a speaker, you are a teacher. So
that's why, in fact, I view myself as a teacher.
Yes.
I speak for a living and I do that, but at the heart of it, I'm a teacher.
Okay. So let's talk about this transition into owning the studios and then getting into the speaking. Because for somebody watching, they're like, oh my gosh, it just happened overnight. How did it get started? And what were some of the things that you did? And of course, some tips and advice for somebody that already has their business and they're wanting to transition into that.
Yeah. Well, it was not an easy transition, as I alluded to before. When I was in the corporate world, I was doing very well. The martial arts was something I always wanted to do professionally. But, you get involved in your day-to-day stuff. In my case, I was married. I had 2 small boys. I was the sole breadwinner. So I had all this anxiety about leaving. And I have to say, even though we're not together anymore, my former spouse was amazing during this period. She was an incredible support. And without her, I don't think it ever would have happened. And we moved to Denver after several relocations. Every time I would get promoted, I would get, relocated again. And we were in Denver for a couple of years. And she said, we love this area. The boys love it here. I know she and I were high school sweethearts. So she knew the story. She said, it's time for you to go for it. And so I did. And, I don't know about any of your listeners out there, but moving from a safe, and I say that in quotation marks, corporate world and the security that comes with it into something that you want to do, because that's where your heart is saying to go, is not only the most exhilarating, but can also be the most petrifying time in your life. And I literally was suffering from panic attacks. So much so that I ended up on the floor of my minister's office in the fetal position just a month or 2 before I was going to open up the school. In fact, then spent the night in Swedish hospital here in Denver. And they told me that if I wasn't such a well-conditioned athlete, my heart was palpitating so fast, I would have gone into cardiac arrest. So when people say, oh, Chris, it was always easy for you, I'm like, you don't remember, you don't understand. But you know what? That fear, what I've come to learn is that fear and anxiety inside the brain is the same thing as excitement. The brain can't differentiate between the two. And so there was a part of me that was fearful, but most of it was my own doing. I was really excited to really follow my heart. I just didn't know how to channel that energy yet. And interestingly enough, As soon as I got through that period, I opened up the school, it literally exploded in growth. So
Amazing.
that was the one time in my life, and I've been very blessed across my life, but that was the one time I knew I was truly on purpose because it
Hmm.
just opened up.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And that's when you know, right? There is resistance, and usually it's our own resistance because we're
Oh, it's
afraid.
totally known.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing of it is my marketing was awful. I mean, all the mistakes, all the things I coach people on now, I did totally wrong, but yet it still grew by leaps and bounds
Mhm.
because I was on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so from the point where you've had your studio or your the gym or training center, whatever you call it, when did you begin speaking and
Yeah, well, that's so, it's interesting. I've gone through twice now pretty major changes because I had the school for 17 years. And literally, when I opened it in 1995, I thought, check, I got this. This is what I'm
Mhm.
going to do for the rest of my life. But then the heart kept saying,
Mhm.
this isn't all, this isn't it.
Mhm.
And I went through a life change. I went through divorce. So I was looking at my life a lot during that time. And I had actually started speaking. I did it in the corporate world
Mhm.
as well. I did sales trainings. But in order to promote my school, I was out speaking all the time.
Right.
I'd see 600, 700 kids in a day. I'd go to schools and I'd go to different functions. And people started saying, you're pretty good at that. And so it kind of evolved from there. And then I
Mm.
was working with a life coach to kind of differentiate what I wanted to do in this next phase of my life. And I remember one day sitting down after he'd observed me, he came to my martial arts school and he said, you need to look at being a coach. He goes,
Mhm.
that's what you do. And not so much coaching, kicking and punching, right? But
Yeah.
sitting down with people, coaching them through their struggles, et cetera. And that ended up becoming my favorite part of being at the school.
Mhm.
And I still love martial arts, but I knew there was something more. And I also knew in my heart that I needed to play a bigger game. When you have a martial arts school, you can kind of be, king of your own little fiefdom, right? But
Yeah.
now there was more people I wanted to reach, and I
Mhm.
and I could use that as a platform, and that's what I've done.
Yeah. And I love that you said you were already doing it because I think one of the biggest misconceptions and what we fail to understand for most of us that are coaching or that have our business, whenever we're talking about ourselves or even when we're speaking to a client or maybe in a room for a few people, you're already speaking. And that's something that I didn't realize because in my head I was like, I want to be a speaker. And then I heard somebody saying, you have a podcast, you already are a speaker. When I first started almost 3 years ago. And that's something for everyone to realize that it starts like that. You have to start somewhere. And as you are talking to clients, or even if you have group coaching or whatever it is you're already doing and you're wanting to take that bigger step, just understand that you're already doing it. It's just a matter of getting in front of more people.
I'd even go this far, Marta, and I do this exercise with my coaching clients when they're looking to delineate their purpose, is to go back through your entire life, all the way back as far as you can remember,
Mm.
and think of the things that you did that inspired and enlivened you, and really made you feel whole, and where you were serving others, and you start to draw that line, and you see you've probably most likely been doing your purpose your entire life.
Yes.
For me, it's about inspiring, teaching, leading, empowering other people, much like you do. And when I drew the line, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this my whole life. And so that's what I call the purpose. It's not, I'm going to be a speaker, I'm going to be a writer, whatever. That's our way of communicating
Hmm.
and sharing our purpose. But for me, it was about being that teacher, that person that empowers others. And I've been doing my whole life. I'm just changing
Yes.
the way I'm doing it now.
Yeah, and I love that exercise that you mentioned because it is so true. Because it really surfaces when we're small, when we're little. And I see this even with my kids, with them being three the same age, how different they are, which is 100% proof that we all are born with something very specific, regardless of being multiples or not. It's already there, and we're already manifesting that. And that's eventually what's going to come up in our career paths and our dreams. And if we just pay close attention to that, it'll give us the clues. We usually look for the clues outside of us, but they're never there.
They're right. They're always here. And the one thing I just add to that before we move on is that everyone has it. And it enlivens me when I hear that people follow it. And it also saddens me at times when people don't follow it.
Mm-hmm.
And, like they say, and I don't know, I can't quote the person because I've heard this attributed to so many people, but when we're on our deathbed,
Mm-hmm.
we generally don't tell the person that we're sorry for all the things we did. We talk to them about the regrets of the things we didn't do.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to be that person. So,
Right. Exactly. Oh, I love that. Amazing. Well, and you talked about how you work with your clients. I wanted to talk about your books and what
Sure.
you cover in some of them, but I also wanted to know how exactly you work with your clients and who exactly it is, if it's mostly entrepreneurs. Tell us more.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I do work with a lot of entrepreneurs,
Okay.
even though I had the corporate experience because owning a business, and I used to do a lot of coaching within the martial art world as well.
Mm,
So entrepreneurs are a great target for me. I think there is no better way of dealing with in your own personal development than being an entrepreneur,
yes.
because everything's right there, right?
100%.
In the corporate world, even when I was doing it, and it was a great company, I could find places to hide.
Right.
But boy, oh boy, when you're doing your corporate work. And what I do is I basically have a 5-step process when I do my coaching with people. I'm very, very attuned and I think very good at helping people identify their vision. That's
Okay.
one of the things I do well. The second stage is we really develop strategies for them to make that a reality. But then the final three, I think, are relatively unique. I help them understand, number one, the mindset shifts that they have to do, what I call the mind of a champion. We
Mhm.
also then, number four, we take a look at the skill set changes. So are there ways that they need to up-level their game in terms of their skills? And then finally is, what are the energy drains that are causing them to be off course?
Mm,
Because many times we're inside of those, we're in those things that don't serve us and we're not even aware of it.
mhm.
We just do because we've always done. So
Yes.
that's one of the things I think I'm pretty good at helping people with, helping them find that vision, clearing things out so that they can
Mhm.
really move forward in it as the best they can.
Yes, because we usually are thinking about what we're not doing. So we go for people for what do I have to do next? And at times is you have to do less.
Right. Well, there's a book by this title. It's like, if half twos were all we needed, we'd all be rich, happy, and thin.
Mm,
Right? If half two,
right.
right? But it's not about, that's part of it. You
Hmm.
have to take the action and you have to do things, but it's so much about where we're coming from.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And that self-awareness is super important. And that's where mentors help us because they can see things we're not seeing because we're so, somebody brought up this concept. I've heard of it before, but it stuck with me. And I always think about it when we talk about self-awareness is that you can't read a label from inside the jar. And it's
Wow.
so true. That's why
Love
we
that.
need mentors, right? Because we
Exactly.
can't
I
see the
love
big
that.
picture.
Mhm.
Amazing. And so tell us about your first book. And I know you just launched your second one. I want you to share a little bit more with us. And if are some of these steps on there? Because I know, is it the
All right.
first one that has champion in the title? Because I would love for you
Yeah.
to explain to us what that means. Because obviously when we think champion in sports, athletes, we understand. But what does that mean as a person and how do we achieve that? I love that analogy.
Well, I'll tell you this little story. So the first book is called Black Belt Leadership: Seven Keys to Discovering Your Inner Champion, right?
Hmm. Yes.
And I have these 7 qualities of black belt leadership. But the metaphor for champion started very early in my martial art career. And so, like I said, I've been blessed to have, competitive success. But the first time I met my Korean martial arts instructor, I was in his class for the first or second time, and I was in the back of the room and my legs were spread wide. I was stretching out, getting ready for the class. And he walked onto the mat with this amazing power and presence. And he's surveying the whole room. And all of a sudden, I realized he's staring directly at me. And before I could move a muscle, he came and he sat down in front of me. And he put his right foot in the inside of one leg, his left foot on the inside of the other. He grabbed the ends of my martial art belt. And with one push pull, he split me out to 180 degrees.
Wow.
Right? So I like to joke. I learned 2 things that morning. And number one is anyone can do the splits one time. But the second thing is he looked at me deep in the eyes that day and he said, I will make you a champion. I will make you a champion. So, at 13 years old, it's like, oh my gosh, I just had someone bring the tablets down and I just believed him. I just believed him. It was life changing for me. But what I realized, Marta, over the last 4 decades is he wasn't just talking about being a martial art champion in the ring. He was talking about being a champion in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
How to have that purposeful vision that I talked about, how to be able to move through obstacles with grace and strength, and then how to take our gifts and serve the world with them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the essence of that message. So that champion, that inner champion, is that voice that we hear when we get quiet, we get rid of the clatter in our heads and we listen to our hearts. And being a champion is taking, in my mind, taking our gifts and sharing them
Mhm.
without any hesitation in the world, and doing it to a point where we're making the world a better place because of who we are and who we're being.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful. And I love it so much. And I think the metaphor and the analogy with sports and with being an athlete is so powerful, because for me, I didn't grow up, my parents didn't really encourage sports because that's not their focus when they were growing up too. It was more the academics and doing well in school, going to college and all that stuff. But I had friends that were very involved. My very best friend from childhood, she played tennis for many years. She got a scholarship for at UNF for playing tennis too. So I learned a lot from her, how dedicated she was, the practices every day after school. And at times I was like, just stop that. Can't you just come play? I didn't understand. But then, growing up now and having my own business, having my kids, and I'm active now with working out, and I love it. And I think it's an important part of my self-care
Right?
and of being centered too. I see how, if people struggle with understanding how powerful personal development is, they may understand a little bit easier when they look at an athlete, when they look at people that train day in and day out, or when they think, Michael Jordan was rejected and was excluded, but he practiced and practiced. Like, this is what it comes down to.
Totally, totally. Well,
That
in my
discipline.
own personal experience, I was fortunate enough to go to college on a football scholarship.
Nice.
And so, but I can almost guarantee that there's no way I would have ever reached that level of athleticism if it wouldn't have been for martial arts.
Mm.
Because naturally I was a good athlete, but I wasn't great naturally.
Hmm.
What it did is it basically pulled everything I had out of me, right? That I
Yeah.
could do that. And and so I think, as I said in martial arts, I'm biased, but when we have a power and an awareness of our bodies, it helps us with our awareness of what's going on inside
Yes.
of ourselves and vice versa.
Yes.
Because, in martial arts, there are struggles that you're dealing with they're a lot more mental
Hmm.
than they are physical.
Hmm.
So you have to be able to find that place inside of ourselves. But what's so beautiful about that is then once you find it once, you can
Hmm.
access it again and again and again in all aspects of your life.
Yes, I love that. And tell us about your latest book and why we need to go check it
Yeah,
out.
okay, right on. Yeah. So, you talked about us getting connected at Gary Barnes boot camp, and the book is really almost an offshoot of that, because I've been for the last, I think, 6 years, have been doing what's called a board breaking experience at
Hmm.
Gary's boot camp. And I now get to do that nationally, right? But it originated with Gary
Amazing.
asking me to do it for the boot camp. And the long short of it is that what I help people do is identify a breakthrough area in their life, and then they also identify the limiting beliefs that are holding them back.
Hmm.
And they literally write it on either side of the board,
Oh.
and then they break the board. Now, I see people all the time in the Denver area that have done this workshop with me, and it's oftentimes very emotionally moving for people. I
Mm.
mean, I've had people with tears
Mm.
streaming down their cheeks, not because their hand hurts, by the way, but because it was such a
It's a good
great thing to do.
disclaimer.
Yeah, right. There's my disclaimer. But I'll see people and they'll go, "Oh my gosh, that was such a great experience. That board is still in my office. I look at it
Mm.
every day and I'm like very honored." But then I thought, did they really have their breakthrough that they wrote on that board? Or did they just have a good time breaking a piece of wood with me?
Mm.
So I thought, well, man, when I'm coaching people, what are the steps that I take them through in order to achieve a breakthrough in
Yeah.
whatever area of their life? And that's what the book is. It's called
Ah.
Breaking Through: Three Winning Strategies for Creating Breakthrough Results in Your Life, Business, or Relationships. And
Hmm.
it's based on what I call the 3 C's of creating breakthrough, which is getting clarity on your vision, creating your plan, and then probably most importantly, taking consistent action.
Hmm. Yes, that consistency is so important. I love that. And I love that it came from your experience of doing this over and over again and thinking, I want to make sure that these people carry this on through their lives and not just that one moment.
Exactly, exactly. Because we all have times in our lives where we have these um, awesome experiences, right? We can all think of them,
Yeah.
and then, but what do we do with them?
Hmm.
Right? Do we have it? Hey, that was awesome. That was great. And I went back right to where I was, or did I choose to use it as a a catalyst to
Hmm.
take to me to greater heights? And that's what I want. And that's why I wrote this book.
Yes, that's amazing. And that's what Makes you such an amazing champion because you're championing other people too and sharing your gifts. I love that. And so before we wrap up, because I completely forgot before we started recording to tell you that I like doing some rapid fire questions.
Okay. All right. Uh-oh.
I
Here they
just
come.
I just give you some words that are based on my framework that I use with my clients, and you just tell me what comes to mind. And it could either be one word or it could be a phrase. You can elaborate. Just feel free to do whatever. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So the first one is notice yourself.
Notice yourself. And I think when I was first growing up and was an athlete, I was noticing myself and oftentimes noticed myself from the flaws and the things I needed to improve. I think as I age and I season, I still am aware of those things, but I'm noticing myself on the good things, the gifts that I can share, and using that as my intention versus trying to become the perfect person.
Right. Oh, that gratitude for yourself and that pride for yourself is amazing. And I think it does come easier with age if we're doing this type of work, obviously.
I would agree.
Awesome. The next one is listen to yourself.
Ah, it's interesting. This took me a while to really learn this because I think what I started to do initially, and I'm pretty, my natural inclination is to go in my head and be analytical. And listening to myself now takes a whole different context because in much of the work that I've done, I've learned that truly listening isn't something I do in my head. It's something I do in my heart. Now the two work together, obviously, right? But it's like slowing down, breathing, and listening to my heart. And so far, so good. It hasn't let me down. But when I get in my head, there have been times it's let me down, to be clear.
Okay, that makes sense. Listen to your heart. That's what listening to yourself is. Love it. The next one is forgive yourself.
Well, I'll tell you, I think most of us are probably hardest on ourselves than we are anyone else.
Totally.
And I know that I have been that way. And one of the things I 4 years, no, 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, I received my master's degree in spiritual psychology from University of Santa Monica. And one of the key tenets in that was compassionate self-forgiveness. And the idea there is that anytime we're dealing with struggles with other people, it's generally a projection of something we're thinking about ourselves. And so starting with, really forgiving ourselves, acceptance is the first step in transformation, if you will. Coming from that place, that's when things begin to open up.
100%. The next one, empower yourself.
Well, it's kind of my work,
Yes.
And I think empowering self, though, comes from also not having as many positive experiences, but having challenging experience and being able to overcome and come on the other side. And man, I also love, from all the experience I've had teaching, there's nothing that I love more than seeing someone struggle and then also have their own personal breakthrough, whether it happens in an hour session with me or someone's been training with me for years. It's what drives me.
Yes, definitely. It's the challenges that strengthen us. Well, they're the opportunity
Right.
for us to be strengthened and to empower ourselves. It's not from the easy stuff
Right.
that we learn. And last but not least, transform yourself.
Oh man. It's what we're here to do. It's our work. I think all of us.
Yes.
It's all of us. We come into different families, different ways of being, and we take on others' beliefs and thoughts and whatever. But really, when we're doing our true work, is just here, listening to that heart, and then transforming and being who we were meant to be, and whatever that means to be. That's when we find our true power, not the power that we expect others expect of us, and that's the transformation.
Right. And it has everything to do with what we talked about in the beginning of that vision, that purpose that's already manifesting itself from our very early years. And it's really a matter of coming back to ourselves. Because just like you said, throughout the years, we take on all these things that are not ours. And then the work is really getting rid of these things and really finding what's us.
Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey. And one of the stages is, going out and having the experiences, but it's always the hero coming back home. And that metaphor works with coming home to ourselves.
Yes, 100%. Oh, I love this so much. Thank you so much for sharing these wise words. So tell us how to find you and also how to get a free access to a part of your book so people can get interested and hooked.
Awesome. Thanks, Martha. So you can always find out all the information on me by going to my website, which is www.chrisnatzke.com. So that's CHRIS, N as in Navy, ATZ as in zebra, KE. And you can download a free chapter of the introduction to my book by going to my website, or something I just started doing last week, so I'd love to have you try it out for me, is text the word breakthrough, one word breakthrough, to 720-741-6263, 741-6263, area code 720, and you can also download the free chapter from there.
Amazing. I love that. Love that little new feature. I'll be sure to put all of the information, the link, and also the phone number in the show notes so people can access it. Thank you so much, Chris. This was amazing. I'm sure everyone's going to be uplifted listening to your story.
Marta, I loved it. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you.
I don't know about you, but there's something even about Chris's voice that is just so peaceful and that really conveys everything that he stands for. I love this conversation, and I hope you will take him up on his offer and check out a chapter, an excerpt of his book. Go ahead and connect with him. All the links are in the show notes. Until next time, bye.